One waitress, one arrogant millionaire, and a grand piano. What began as an attempt to humiliate her turned into a moment that silenced the room and shattered egos. All she had was her talent, and that was more than enough. It was a warm Friday evening, and the upscale hum of conversation filled La Fontaine, a high-end restaurant nestled in the heart of Raleigh, North Carolina. Glasses clinked. Jazz drifted from a piano in the corner. Waitstaff moved with quiet efficiency. Deborah, a 25-year-old waitress, maneuvered through the crowd with practiced grace, balancing plates and polite smiles. Most saw her as just another server, but inside, she held something far more powerful than anyone suspected. Music was her escape, her secret, her soul. From the time she could reach the keys, the piano had been her sanctuary. But dreams didn't pay rent. So she worked. Long shifts, aching feet, fake smiles, but always with the hope that one day she'd trade her apron for a music academy badge. She never stopped playing. In quiet moments, when the staff room emptied out and the old upright piano sat lonely in the back, she'd sneak in a few notes. The restaurant staff had heard her, once or twice, but no one outside. That circle knew what she was capable of. That night, as the dinner rush ebbed, the front doors opened, and in walked Leonard Grayson. Everyone recognized him. Flashy suit, polished shoes, loud laugh. The kind of man who made money his personality, a known entrepreneur with a reputation for being sharp, arrogant, and ruthless. Deborah didn't flinch. He was just another table. But Leonard wasn't about to be just another customer. His eyes landed on her the moment she approached, and something about her seemed to pique his interest. Maybe it was the way she held herself, quiet but firm. Or maybe it was that he could sense she was different, and different made for good sport. He made jokes, loud ones. His entourage laughed too hard. Deborah smiled through it, took their orders, and tried to disappear into the routine. But Leonard wasn't done. He leaned over, glanced at her name tag. "Deborah," he said, dragging the syllables like they amused him. "Sounds like someone with hidden talents." She nodded politely and moved on. She didn't notice the smug glint in his eye. But the moment was sealed. Later, as she returned with their wine, Leonard struck. Again. "Tell me," he said, just loud enough for others to hear. "What do you do when you're not carrying plates? A young woman like you must have dreams." Deborah hesitated. A dozen answers flashed through her mind, but one slipped out. "I play piano. Sometimes." Leonard's face lit up. "A pianist? Fascinating." Then, loud and sharp, "Why don't you give us a little performance?" She froze. Conversations paused. Heads turned. "Oh, I couldn't," she said with a forced laugh. "I'm just working tonight." "Nonsense," he boomed. "There's a piano right there. Show us what you've got." Her heart pounded. She looked around, searching for help, but even her co-workers stayed quiet. Leonard leaned back, smug. "Ah," he said, "all talk, no talent. That's disappointing." It stung. Not just the words, but the tone. Like he'd already decided she was beneath him. Like her dreams were a joke. Her mother's voice came to her then, gentle and firm. "Never let anyone make you small, Deborah. You're bigger than they'll ever know." She looked at Leonard, then at the piano. She didn't want to, but she needed to. "Fine," she said quietly. "I'll play." A hush fell. She crossed the room slowly, each step heavy with fear and defiance. Leonard's grin grew wider, confident that whatever happened next would prove his point. She sat down, took a deep breath, and let her fingers find the keys. The first notes were soft, tentative. The room didn't quite know what to make of it. A few diners whispered. A fork clinked on a plate. But Deborah kept playing. She chose Claude Debussy's Clair de Lune, a piece she'd practiced 1,000 times. It started like a whisper, but then grew, swelled, transformed the air. People stopped eating. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even Leonard's smug posture shifted. He leaned forward, confused. Deborah wasn't just playing, she was telling a story. Her story. With every note, every crescendo, she let the room see the girl who taught herself to play on a broken piano. The girl who watched her mother come home in scrubs every night with aching legs, but never once gave up. The girl who still believed, deep down, that she had something to offer the world. When she finished, the room didn't move. Silence held for just a moment longer, then erupted in applause. Real applause. Leonard sat stunned. His entourage didn't know where to look. Deborah stood, nodded once, and walked away. Not back to her section, but to the kitchen, her chin held high. She hadn't played for him, or for them. She played for every waitress who ever felt invisible, for every girl told her dreams weren't practical, for every soul that's ever had to swallow pride just to make rent. That night, the piano didn't just sing, it roared. Her hands moved with a grace that betrayed the chaos inside her. The notes poured out like a confession, each chord carrying fragments of her story, the sacrifices her mother made, the countless nights she spent practicing in a cramped room. The weight of dreams deferred but never abandoned. The diners fell silent, their earlier chatter replaced by a stillness that settled like fog. Even Leonard, who had been whispering smugly to his companions, went quiet. Deborah didn't need to look at him to sense the shift. The mocking energy had vanished, replaced by something unspoken, maybe awe, maybe humility. The music soared, and Deborah let herself go. For the first time in what felt like years, she wasn't a waitress or a struggling dreamer. She was simply herself, an artist. Her fingers danced across the keys, drawing out emotions so raw they seemed to hang in the air like smoke. When she struck the final chord, the room was utterly still. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The resonance of the piano lingered in the air like a held breath. Deborah sat frozen, her hand resting on the keys, unsure what would come next. Then, as though waking from a trance, the room erupted into applause. It was thunderous, echoing off the walls and washing over her in a wave. Some diners stood, clapping with such fervor it brought tears to her eyes. Her co-workers joined in from the sidelines, their faces bright with pride. Leonard, however, remained seated. His smirk was gone, replaced by something unreadable, part shock, part discomfort. He clapped slowly, the sound hollow compared to the room's cheers, but even his reluctant applause couldn't diminish what she had just done. Deborah had reclaimed her voice, and no amount of condescension could take that away. As the applause faded, the room seemed to exhale. She stood slowly, her knees trembling but her spine straight. She scanned the room and, for the first time, that evening truly saw the people watching her, not as spectators but as witnesses. Their expressions held admiration, respect, even awe. She didn't look at Leonard immediately. Instead, she gave a small nod to the diners who had clapped the loudest, her lips curving into a faint smile. It wasn't pride she felt. It was relief. Relief that fear hadn't silenced her. But eventually her eyes were drawn to him, like a magnet. Leonard was still seated, his hands clasped in front of him. The cocky smirk he'd worn so easily earlier was gone. Now his face was a mask of forced neutrality, as though he couldn't decide whether to admit his misstep or double down on arrogance. "Well," Leonard finally said, his voice louder than necessary, breaking the fragile silence. "That was unexpected." He chuckled, but the sound lacked its usual bravado. "I suppose talent really does come from the most surprising places." His words fell flat, landing with a dull thud. His companions glanced at one another, unsure whether to laugh or stay silent. Deborah tilted her head slightly, studying him. His words were meant to be an olive branch, but they were empty, weighed down by his inability to truly acknowledge the moment. "Thank you," she said, her tone steady and measured. There was no warmth, but no malice either. She wasn't going to let him pull her back into the smallness he had tried to impose. Her music had said more than any comeback ever could. Leonard cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable under the gaze of the room. He gestured for another drink, a flimsy attempt at regaining composure. "You've got quite a gift," he added, almost begrudgingly. Deborah nodded once, her gaze unwavering. "Everyone has a gift," she said. "It's how you choose to use it that matters." The room seemed to hold its breath again. Her words weren't loud or aggressive, but they struck with precision. Leonard shifted in his seat, his usual air of dominance slipping away. The diners returned to their meals, but the atmosphere had changed. Where there had once been the low hum of privilege and pretense, there was now something else, something deeper. A quiet recognition of authenticity. Leonard wasn't just humiliated. He was exposed, and no charm could shield him from the truth. Everyone in that room now saw it. Deborah stepped away from the piano, the weight of the moment settling in her chest. Her colleagues met her with subtle nods and quiet smiles as she returned to her station. She still had a job to finish, but her posture had changed. Her head was higher, her movements more assured. Leonard's table had gone quiet. His entourage, who had laughed so freely at her earlier, now avoided eye contact. Their voices were subdued. The arrogance that once filled their corner of the restaurant had evaporated, leaving behind an awkward hush. The night went on, but Deborah felt lighter. Every step she took through the dining room felt more grounded. Her confidence bloomed in ways she hadn't anticipated. Guests stopped her to offer kind words. "You're incredible," said an older woman as Deborah set down a coffee cup. "I don't think I've ever heard anything so moving." "Keep going," added a man nearby. "You've got something special. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Deborah thanked them with quiet humility. These weren't just compliments, they were affirmations, signs that her dream had been seen and felt. Leonard, however, wasn't quite so gracious. When Deborah approached with the check, he looked up with an expression that hovered between annoyance and reluctant admiration. "You've made your point," he said, his tone clipped. "No need to rub it in." Deborah paused, meeting his gaze. "It was never about proving anything to you," she replied calmly. "I just wanted to play." He had no response. He fidgeted with his drink, the dominance he once wielded now reduced to awkward silence. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and everyone at the table felt it. As Leonard signed the check, one of his companions, a younger man with softer eyes, looked at Deborah and said, "You were amazing, truly." His sincerity caught her off guard. For a moment, she saw a flicker of humanity in a group she had written off entirely. "Thank you," she said, offering a small smile before walking away. Leonard and his party left quietly, their usual grand exit replaced by something smaller, more rushed. Deborah watched them go with no triumph and no resentment. She wasn't thinking about Leonard anymore. Her mind was already on what came next. The tips that night were unusually generous, enough to cover her rent and leave a little for the piano lessons she'd been postponing. As she locked up and walked home, the crisp night air filled her lungs with something new. Certainty. She wasn't just a waitress. She wasn't just a dreamer. She was an artist. And nothing, not mocking words, not money troubles, not fear, could take that from her. Her thoughts weren't on the conflict. They were on the future, the one that finally felt within reach. At home, she sat on the worn bench of her small, upright piano. The sound wasn't as rich as the grand one at La Fontaine, but that didn't matter. The music came from her heart, just as it always had. Something had shifted inside her that night. Not just a moment of triumph, but a realization. Her talent didn't need permission. It didn't need justification. It simply was, and it was enough. In the days that followed, her performance became a local legend. Diners told the story, word spread, and a few days later, Deborah received a call. A man who had been in the audience that night, an independent music producer visiting from Nashville. He wasn't offering fame or fortune, just a chance to record a demo. A door cracked open, and for the first time, she wasn't afraid to walk through it. For years, fear had whispered lies in her ear, that she wasn't enough, that her dreams were too big. But now she knew the truth. Her resilience, her authenticity, those were her power. Leonard Grayson hadn't just been a man. He had been every voice of doubt she had ever known, and she silenced him with nothing but music. To anyone watching, Deborah's story was a quiet but resounding message. Never let someone else define your worth. The world is full of people like Leonard, those who use their insecurities to tear others down. But real strength lies in staying true to who you are, letting your voice, your gift, speak louder than their ridicule. As she closed the piano lid and rested her hands on the faded wood, Deborah smiled. Her journey was far from over. But for the first time, it had truly begun. And what about you? What dream have you kept on pause, held back by fear or doubt? Don't wait for someone like Leonard to challenge it. Take your step now. If Deborah's story spoke to you, subscribe for more stories of resilience and quiet triumph. Your story might be next.